Hello, welcome. I hope you've been well. Today is gonna be a cool video, I think. I did a poll on my Instagram to see which video you guys wanted to watch, and it was a tie. So I just made the executive decision and I decided we're gonna do a MrBallen video because we haven't done one in quite a while. And so the video today is police photograph demon in basement, the Ammons haunting. So I think it's going to be a bit of a scary one.
There is a house in Gary, Indiana that has been dubbed the Demon House. Now, if you were to walk past this house,
I want to live there.
It wouldn't stand out to you. It's a very modest, single-story, 3-bedroom home. Looks like all the other houses around it, but the history behind this house is totally bizarre. LaToya Ammons, who is a mother of 3 that lived inside of this house with her 3 kids, she began to report to the police that demons were throwing her children against the wall. Now, when police got the report that children are being thrown against the wall, their first thought is, you're an unfit parent. And so they sent Child Protective Services and the police to go check out this residence and make sure that she really was a competent parent. They are shocked at what they find. And what they find is documented in a police report. And courtesy of the executive producer of 317 Films, Christopher Geizot, I have a copy of said police report. And when I read through this thing for the first time, I literally wrote him an email and said, this is fake. There's no way this is an actual police
I'm
report.
nervous.
He said, no, that's real. It's from the Lake County Sheriff's Department. It is the official police report, and it's mind-blowing. Today, I'm going to tell the story of what happened when the police got involved, and I'm just going to use information that was in the police report. But before we get into today's crazy story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark...
This kind of reminds me of that, the bit in the Conjuring film where the police in the UK went to the house to investigate what was happening because the mum was, saying that the house was haunted and the police didn't believe her, so they went over there and they were like, okay. Next minute the chair moved into the kitchen and they were like, nah, see you later. So straight off the bat I feel like this might be a little bit similar, maybe not, just with the police report. I don't know, we'll find out.
LaToya Ammons was mistreating her children based on reports that she gave. She was telling police that demons were throwing her kids around the house. Based on those reports, Child Protective Services was sent to do a home study, to go to their house, go to LaToya Ammons' house, and make sure it was a safe, clean place for children to be living. In addition to the case manager, her name was Valerie Washington, who was going to be going over to do this home study, the Lake County Sheriff Department also sent over Lieutenant Gruszka, who would be assisting Valerie and watching the home study take place. When Gruszka arrives at the house, he is met with Valerie Washington, also LaToya Ammons, the mother, and her 2 sons, Andrew, who's 9, and Amante, who's 7, as well as LaToya's mother, so the boy's grandmother. Her name was Rosa. Washington, the case manager, pulls Gruszka aside out of earshot of LaToya and her family, and she starts telling Gruszka about what happened at the hospital 8 days earlier, because she, the case manager, had already begun investigating LaToya Ammons and that whole situation with her kids. 8 days earlier, Washington was at the hospital, sitting in a waiting room. Washington was with a psychologist, and they were speaking to Rosa, who was the grandmother of the children.
Okay.
In the room was also Andrew, the oldest son, and Amante, the youngest son. And as they're chatting, Amante, the youngest son, stands up and walks to the middle of the waiting room. And his eyes roll back into his skull, and he begins emitting this growling sound that sounded too deep for a boy of 7 years old. The grandmother reacted to it like she had seen it before. She got right up, she marched over to him, and she took him by the hands, and she yelled, "You are not you." And she kept saying that, and the boy's eyes are still back in his head, and he's not responding to anything his grandmother's saying. As Rosa is repeating over and over again, "You are not you," Amante begins backpedaling towards a wall behind him. And Rosa holds his hands the whole time. She's holding his hands firmly.
Oh, if he
gets
climbs
to
up
the
the
wall, and instead of stopping, he puts his foot up against the wall. This is a 7-year-old boy.
Called it.
and begins walking up the wall by pressing against Rosa. And she's holding on tight, and he's pressing back at her and using that weight to walk backwards up the wall. The psychologist in Washington are just watching in disbelief. Rosa's holding on to him as he walks all the way up to where he's on his tippy toes on the wall. And then he flips forward in front of her and lands on his feet on the other side of Rosa. The psychologist and Washington literally run out of the room, and they go get a doctor, and they explain what happened. The doctor comes in, not having any clue what the negative, and just says to the boy, "Can you do that again?" And Amante at this point, his eyes are back to normal, and he's sitting now next to Rosa, and he says, "What? I didn't do anything," and acted like he had not been walking up the walls. Now, it's not in the report how Lieutenant Gruszka responds to Washington's story about the hospital. However, the entire police report that I'm pulling all this information from is written by Lieutenant Gruszka at the end of the investigation. So this exchange between he and the case manager, Washington, about the hospital visit that he was not part of, it apparently carried weight in the entire investigation, that he felt compelled to add it into the report. Even though on paper, you would think, if you're doing a home study for this house, why would you incorporate something that didn't have anything to do with the house? It gives you maybe an insight into Lieutenant Gruszka, although his language remains super professional and very pragmatic, that perhaps Lieutenant Gruszka, at the end of this investigation, was starting to think, this might be paranormal. After this story, 2 more police officers show up to the house to assist with this home study. One was Brian Miller, and the other was Charles Austin. At this point, the 3 officers, Gruszka, Miller, and Austin, along with the case manager, Washington, begin walking towards the family and towards the front door of the house. LaToya says that she and her kids will not go back in the house because they had moved out very recently because of the strangeness that they claim was happening inside of the house. They felt like they were under attack by demons. And so the police, they needed someone to bring them in. And so Rosa, the grandmother, LaToya's mother, she offered to go in with them. So the house is a single-story, 3-bedroom house. You walk in and you're inside of this screened-in porch. You go into the main level. There's a few bedrooms, and then there's a stairwell that leads down into the basement. And so they go in, and Lieutenant Gruszka is in charge of taking pictures and recording audio the whole time they're in the house. They were not aware that they had already moved out. So it's a bit of an awkward home study because they're not even living there anymore. But either way, they're going to do their job. They're walking around, taking pictures of each of the bedrooms. There's 3 bedrooms, there's a kitchen, basic stuff upstairs. And then they go downstairs to the basement. Now, the basement was where LaToya and her family claimed the majority of the paranormal activity was taking place. The steps leading down to the basement were wood. They went down into the basement. The basement floor was concrete, and the walls were concrete blocks. As they go down, Lieutenant Gruszka would notice that there were candles that had been placed all over the basement floor that had burned down to their wick. There was also an altar and a nativity scene that had been placed near the underside of the stairs. And so when Gruszka goes over to take pictures of the altar and the nativity scene, he recognizes that under the stairs, near where those 2 things are placed, it's all dirt. The concrete that made up the floor of the basement had been broken away, and there was jagged pieces of concrete where there should have been a continuous flow of concrete underneath the steps. It had been snapped up and broken away. It was gone. When Rosa was questioned about the strangeness of the basement with all the candles and the altar, she just said that there's a presence down here, and that's all she was able to articulate. The other officers and the case manager and Rosa, they go back upstairs, and Lieutenant Gruszka and Charles Austin, the other officer, they stay in the basement and take a few extra pictures, a couple more underneath the stairs, and just of the candles before they ultimately go upstairs as well. When Gruszka comes upstairs, Rosa's waiting for him, and she's about to turn the light off leading down into the basement, and she asks him, "Did you get any pictures underneath the stairs?" And he said, Yeah, I did. I stayed down there and I took some more pictures. She looks at him and she says, "Sometimes at night when we're sleeping on the main floor, we'll hear commotion in the basement. It sounds like maybe someone bumping on the underside of the stairs. And then you hear footsteps walking up the wood steps.
Oh, no.
And whatever it is stops on the other side of the door leading into the main floor, and it will stay there for hours. We're too scared to open the door to look." Gruszka goes back to his office and he immediately uploads the pictures that he took with a focus on the ones he took in the basement. And he finds that there is a couple pictures he took under the stairs, that in the right-hand corner of the picture, just behind one of the steps, it's partially obscured, is a white mist or a white cloud. And he zooms in on it, and he brings in other officers, and they look at it, and if you zoom in close enough, it looks like a man's face. As they're zoomed in on this mist underneath the stairs, they can see, only because they've zoomed in, that there appears to be a faint green mist on the left side of the picture. Appears to be a woman's face. Gruszka and Austin, who were the only two in the basement at the time of these pictures taken, swear they did not see a white or green mist under the stairs when they took pictures. Gruszka,
I want to see the photo.
It doesn't say in the report how he's feeling, but you can imagine he's starting to feel a little bit uneasy about what he's witnessing. Gruszka just goes to his audio recording. And so he fast forwards to the section where he and Austin are alone in the basement taking these additional photos. And you can clearly hear on the recording Gruszka and Austin talking to each other as they're taking these pictures. At some point, as they're taking these pictures of the basement, a third voice, not Austin, not Gruszka, say directly into the audio recorder, "Hey." The audio recorder was one that Gruszka was used to using, and it had never malfunctioned before. And he and Austin were the only ones down there. And so they couldn't explain where the third voice was coming from, and neither could any of the other officers who listened to it. On April 30th, Gruszka set up a meeting with Latoya Ammons' priest, who she was very close with. They were regular churchgoers. This priest, his name was Father Maginot, he had been at the Ammons residence 5 days before this home visit was done, when Latoya Ammons and her family was still living in that residence. And so Gruszka went to interview him to get a sense of what it was like when they were still living there. Father Maginot said he was there because Latoya had reached out and said, "I don't know what to do," because she's claiming there are demons here. And while they're sitting in the living room on the main floor, Father Maginot is telling Gruszka that the bathroom light started flickering on and off. And so it was distracting enough that ultimately Father Maginot got up and walked over to the bathroom, and as soon as he went inside, the flickering stopped. And then he'd go back down and sit down, and it would start again. Repeatedly, Father Maginot would get up when it was flickering, he would go in and it would stop, he'd come back and it would start flickering again. So while this is happening and Father Maginot is going back and forth to the bathroom trying to figure out why the light is flickering, Latoya points out that a liquid is forming on one of the window blinds in the room that they were all sitting in. There was this oily liquid substance that was just kind of trickling down the window blinds. And Father Maginot walks over and looks at it. They're all looking at it, and there's no leak in the ceiling. There's no source for this liquid, and it hadn't been there before. At least that's what Latoya Ammons and her family is saying, that that's not from us. We don't know what that is. As they're looking at this oily substance on the blinds, the cord that controls the blind itself starts swaying back and forth. And everyone's startled as they're looking at it because there's no draft in the room, the window's not open, there's no reason it should be swaying. While they're looking at this cord, Father Maginot looks down and sees this huge footprint in the carpet near where they're standing that was too big to be his, and nobody else in the house had a footprint that was that big. At this point, Father Maginot doesn't think it's safe for the family to be there and advises her to leave. And this would actually be the episode that prompts Latoya Ammons and her family to leave the house and not come back. On May 10th, Lieutenant Gruszka, a new Child Protective Services case manager, and a host of police officers go back to the Ammons residence. The Ammons residence has been unoccupied with all utilities shut off, locked and sealed since the last time they were there, which was on April 27th. So it's a 2-week period that no one has been in the house. But there was a customary follow-up to this house. They had to as part of the home study. When Lieutenant Gruszka arrives at the property, outside is Father Maginot, as well as Latoya Ammons, her mother, Rosa, Latoya's 2 sons, Andrew and Amante, as well as a host of police officers. There's a canine unit that's there. Although it's not said explicitly in the report, it would appear that the reason there's all this additional police presence in a canine unit is because there's enough weirdness being reported about the house. There could be, a home invasion situation happening, that somebody else is living in this house. Any number of things could be happening, but they can't write off all of the strange testimony about what's happening in the house. So before they go in for this second home study, they have one of the dogs from the canine unit go into the property and search the property for intruders, just in case this was a home invasion or something like that. They wanted to just check the box. So they send the dog in, the dog comes out, hasn't found anything unusual. And so the police, along with Father Maginot, the case manager, and Rosa, they go back into the house. The main level...
The grandma again?
There was nothing strange happening in the main level when they walked around. Nothing was disturbed. It looked like no one had been here in 2 weeks. So they open the door to the basement, they turn on the light, and a couple weird things happen right away. One, they notice that on the steps, on the wooden steps leading into the basement, there is an oily substance with no clear origin that goes all the way down the steps, snakes around the side, and disappears underneath the stairs. As they begin walking down the stairs, the case manager from Child Protective Services happens to touch a cabinet that had been built into the walls along the stairwell leading down into the basement, and immediately she pulls her hand back. She grabs her pinky and she reacts like something had hurt her. And they ask, hey, what's going on? And she's like, I don't know, I just touched the cabinet and my hand now hurts. My pinky hurts, it's tingling. And it apparently had turned white. We don't have any images to show that, but her pinky basically had been wounded just from touching this cabinet. And so the officers go down into the basement, they follow this oily trail that goes back under the stairs, and they're thinking to themselves, all the utilities have been turned off. There's no reason there should be any water down here. Not to mention there's no origin for this oily substance. And no one's been in the house for the past 2 weeks. So we can't even account for this by saying that one of the family members might have spilled something. And so even though it's not written into the report that they were scared or that they were considering this could be beyond rational explanation, it's clear from what happens next that everybody there was ready to explore the idea that something was happening underneath the steps, because now the family's claimed there's been something crawling out of there and walking up the stairs at night. You have this strange oily substance coming from the underside of the stairs. You have
the photos with the
green
mist
apparition inside of the pictures. Father Maginot suggested that if there was some sort of demonic possession happening in the house, that there's a good chance they would find things underneath the steps that were tied to the family. And so they decide they're gonna dig up the dirt underneath the steps. And so Gruszka begins digging into this dirt patch under the steps. And he makes it about 2 feet down. And he finds a press-on pink fingernail. He also finds women's underwear. And as he keeps digging, he finds a political pin, like for your t-shirt. He also finds the lid to one of the cooking pots from upstairs. He continues to dig and he finds some trash and miscellaneous papers, and it dawns on the group that someone or something is leaving the basement, going into the main section of the house, taking things from the family, going back downstairs, going underneath the steps, and burying them. And probably has been for some time. And so at some point they stopped being able to dig any farther. The soil was too hard, so they put the soil back and decide to leave the house. As they're leaving the house, Rosa is the last one to leave, and she actually says, hey, come over here. And she's standing in that screened-in porch, and she's looking up at the window blinds. On the window blinds in the house is that same, or it appeared to be the same, oily substance trickling down the blinds that matched the description of what Father Maginot had said he had seen when he was visiting the family before and saw liquid coming down the blinds. And so the officers reacted to this by saying, Rosa, did you do this? Are you responsible for putting this liquid on the blinds? And she said no. There was no clear source for this liquid. There was no leak. There was nothing. And so Lieutenant Gruszka wipes the liquid off of the blinds and tells everyone to leave the house. For 25 minutes they waited, and then they went back inside to see if there was going to be liquid there, and there was. And Father Maginot would say that after that first time he was there and he saw the liquid dripping down, he did some research, and it's very common over the history of time that if there's any sort of demonic possession in a house, that liquids will ooze from different areas in the house. And it's this oily substance that matches the description of what they just saw. At this point, Lieutenant Gruszka and the police tell everyone to vacate the premise. They lock it up and they leave.
Get the fuck out!
The police report. Although not included in this police report, where I pulled all of the story from, Charles Austin, who was the other officer who was in the basement with Lieutenant Gruszka when they were taking pictures underneath the steps and they heard that voice on the recorder. Well, Charles Austin actually worked for another police department, the Ammons Police Department, and he took some pictures of the outside of this house during the time that no one was staying at the house. And one of the official police pictures
I want to see some
shows
pictures.
a shadowy figure standing in the screened-in porch of this house, right near where that liquid was dripping down the blinds. In 2014, Zach Bagans, who's a popular paranormal investigator, he hosts the show Ghost Adventures, he purchased the Demon House and filmed a documentary that he called The Demon House, and you can check that out for yourself, and he demolished the house in 2016. So I'd love to get your opinion on this story, because I told it based on information that was available in official police documentation. Now, that doesn't mean that it was paranormal, that this house was haunted, that there were demons there, but it at least makes you wonder what was really happening in that house.
So, a few things. Okay, what happened to the little boy? He, to me, seems a little sus. He could be possessed, maybe? So, yeah. How's the little boy doing? That's what I'd like to know. That was a really cool story. I enjoyed that. Just feel bad for the grandma and the little boy, you know. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and watching this MrBallen video, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.